Hello and welcome to ChatGCP, a medical science, clinical research and commercialization podcast, and I'm your host, Charles Beasley. On today's episode, we have Matt Needham, a market access professional. You might be asking, what is market access? Well, market access is the discipline by which the argument is made to payers, whether that be the healthcare system in the case of universal healthcare, or insurers, for the reimbursement of a product, be it a medical device or pharmaceutical. Market access is vital in order to get registered products to a patient. And these activities ensure that our patients get access to the most cost-effective solutions for their conditions. On another note, today's episode is brought to you by SAPRO, your clinical trial pathway partner. Every clinical trial is unique, and the most effective solution is to engage in a distinguished and highly experienced project consultant who can tailor your trial needs and ensure that your trial is delivered on time with the highest integrity and with all risks considered. Engaging SAPRO as your clinical trial pathway partner will ensure delivery on your strategic objectives, keeping you and your collaborators on track, providing ultimate success and bringing your product to market sooner. For the small pharma or biotech company, SAPRO also offers a tailored full-service CRO solutions from start to finish with their team of experts and their highly reputable alliance partners. Check out the links to SAPRO's services in the show notes below, but now, friends, please welcome Matt Needham. All right, so let's get straight into it. Can market access, so that's your bread and butter, that's what you do in your role at Roche. Mm-hmm. For the uninitiated, what does market access really mean? And maybe further to that, how did you get into that role? Line of work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I probably just want to mention up front, I guess I do work for a biopharmaceutical firm, but I'm just not sort of here representing their views or their opinions. I'm sort of here talking about my own experiences. But yeah, market access, that's the role that I've kind of cut my teeth on over the last kind of 10 years in New Zealand and Australia predominantly. How does one get into market access? When I was starting out, there was probably not the kind of like the direct university degree to job kind of pathway for health economics and market access. Like it was a discipline certainly, and there were already countries adopting sort of health technology assessment and these sorts of concepts, but it probably wasn't it's certainly in my experience widely known as a discipline. Yep. And so I, like many of my colleagues, kind of got into it a bit sort of serendipitously or indirectly, I guess. I ended up doing an internship at a smaller biotech company in Sydney at the end of my degree, and that was originally a marketing project actually, and I in parallel realized that perhaps marketing was not something that I really felt passionately about, but I was just hanging around the office a lot. I was in Sydney, I was in my early 20s, and I didn't really know a lot of people, so I would just hang out there and chat to people and get a bit of a feel for what the industry was about. And one of the people who I spoke to a lot was their market access director, and this kind of idea of mixing business and economics and that kind of disciplines with the science and the kind of the evidence, the comparative effectiveness evidence and things like that really kind of appealed to me. I thought that was really interesting, and so I did a bit of work with her over the sort of 6 months that I was there, and then at the back of that started working at a consultancy doing assessments for medicines to be submitted to the Australian government, who follow a sort of what we call a health technology assistant framework, which Abbas, you're kind of your first guest, first episode, spoke very, very well and sort of clearly about what the concepts of health economics and cost benefit analysis and things like that. And so that's a big piece of it. And that's kind of how I got started. I kind of learnt on the job as you sort of tend to do, and it's just grown. It's just kind of grown from there. Yeah,
amazing. It's almost like ubiquitous, the story in a lot of clinical research, medical science, commercialization. People just kind of fall into their various disciplines, and we're not like made aware of all the different slices of roles that you can get into that are all part of this wider ecosystem to bring novel science into a product and then into a patient. At the other end, it's all actually all interconnected. I've said this before, but initially I was just ChatGCP, that kind of really strongly suggests it's just clinical research. But I made the realization that, it's actually all interconnected. You can't have strong clinical research without having good medical science, and you can't have, patients getting access to the new stuff without people like yourself in the middle. Once the drug is ready to go or the medical device is ready to go. Absolutely. So essentially, market access is about making sure that a patient gets access to a drug or medical device at the right time, right price.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess there's different systems around the world and different kind of questions or ways in which a medical technology, health technology can get to patients. I think in a lot of countries, New Zealand's a good example where we have what we would kind of call a universal healthcare system, where the government is really responsible for investing in health services, and that includes devices and medicines. In order to sort of heavily subsidize those or to make those almost free of charge for patients. And so that's kind of when we talk about market access in a country like New Zealand, that's really what that means. It's about making an investment case to the payer, so the government. And in New Zealand's case, that's predominantly Pharma for medicines, it's Te Whatu Ora or the hospitals DHBs for other health technologies often. But it's about kind of going along and presenting a body of evidence that shows that against what is current standard of care, this new intervention delivers some level of benefit. And that then from those benefits, we sort of go through a process that very clearly articulated around valuing, putting a value to that benefit, and then out of that falls often, what is the appropriate kind of price level for that intervention, and then you have a bit of a discussion around, well, is that good value for money against other potential investments that you can make? Is the budget impact of that investment affordable? And then, if those two questions are yes, then we're happy days, we're away.
Yeah, so there's kind of two steps, right? Because there's the registration of the drug or medical device, and then there's the actual, like you mentioned, the approval to fund it. Just because something is registered doesn't mean automatically a patient gets access to it, particularly in a universal healthcare system. Maybe if it's registered and it's commercially available via the sponsor and you've got deep pockets in many cases, that's fine, or you've got health insurance, that's fine. But often there's a bit of a delay between registration and then actually the funding side of things in the case of universal healthcare systems like New Zealand and elsewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're absolutely right. Once a regulator has approved a technology or a medicine, it's available in the country and can be purchased privately. Often that is inaccessible to most people, particularly for conditions that either are rarer or have higher cost therapies associated with them. So cancer, I guess, is a good example of that, where the treatment costs are prohibitively high for most people. And so really it's about making those investment decisions as a government to make those treatments available to the widest possible proportion of people.
Right. And what's the process like in New Zealand? We talked in broad strokes with Abbas in the first episode of the general types of health technology assessment mechanisms that you have. So like cost minimization, cost utility, cost benefit. There's another one in there that is eluding me.
There's lots of different types.
But those are the four kind of main big categories. But how does it, strictly speaking, in New Zealand, what's the standard approach that you would take? You kind of do a business case and you present it to Pharmac or whatever the other payer might be, Te Whatu Ora. And I imagine there's a lot of discussion that goes on back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So in New Zealand, the role of evaluator and payer is played by Pharmac for medicines and for a range of different agencies depending on what the health technology is for other things. My experience mainly is in medicines, and so we can probably talk about Pharmac as probably an example of that. But essentially, the beginning of the process is that the sponsor or the company collate all of the evidence that they have to show that there is a particular clinical benefit or a patient-relevant benefit to this particular intervention. And ideally, you would be able to compare directly that new intervention with the relevant standard of care in New Zealand. And so that's not always the easiest or always the case that you would have a direct head-to-head clinical trial in that with that particular comparison, but there are ways to get around that if you don't. You can make indirect comparisons via common comparators and things like that. So there's more technical aspects of how you would go about that. But really, that's the kind of the basis for an application, and it sort of follows an acronym that is sort of common in our space called PICO, which is basically describing who the population is that's going to receive the intervention, so the patient group, what the intervention is. So you sort of go through a bit of a discussion on the mechanism of action, the biological plausibility for why you would expect the results that you see in the clinical trial. The comparator, so what are you going to be substituting or replacing in clinical practice, and then the outcomes. So what are the clinical benefits that your patient benefits that your intervention is going to deliver, and are those important? Are they meaningful for the patient or for the healthcare system? And you sort of go through a process of developing all of that and synthesizing that into a kind of a not always concise dossier that describes as well as you can from the evidence that you have, a sort of a summary of why you would want to invest in this particular intervention. I guess that's what you're trying to get to, really.
Yeah, so it really does cross the boundary between science, economics, medical writing, business case, a bit of marketing, all into one.
Absolutely.
So you're jack of all trades.
Yeah, well, you sort of, you just sort of have to be. And to be fair, like, we're not. I'm not an island in my company. Like, so we work across the different disciplines. So I'm not just kind of left alone in a dark room just to develop these sort of things. Like it really is a team effort, and so it does draw. But you're actually right. It draws on every aspect of certainly of a commercial operation like ours to describe all of those different pieces in sort of a concise way.
Yeah, well, that's super interesting. I mean, Pharmac has often lauded as being incredibly important and well tasked organisation. It was established in the 90s, right?
That's right.
Maybe we can talk about the history of Pharmac and why it was put in place, and then maybe follow it through time, because obviously we've gone from a previous guest referred to it as medicine 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. Like medicine 1.0 is like medicine of yore, 1800s and before. And then we've got like medicine 2.0, which is our small molecule being blasted out to big populations. And then medicine 3.0 really leverages unique genotypes or phenotypes or what have you, unique markers for a more targeted delivery. So that's your personalized medicine and precision medicine. But I'm kind of getting lost in the weeds here, but maybe we can talk about, in New Zealand specifically, because it's quite interesting. Pharmac was set up to solve what kind of problem?
Yeah, so I mean, it was set up in 1993, I think, early 90s. And really, it was established because there was a view that I think as a small market, as a small country like New Zealand, we were not able to use market power to get good prices for medicines, I think, was the kind of the view internationally. And so there was a kind of a view that over time our expenditure on pharmaceuticals was growing at a very rapid rate. And so that we needed to introduce some kind of balance to the system that would try and prevent the continued rapid growth of that. And so Pharmac's remit really, when they were established, was to deliver the best health outcomes for New Zealanders, but within a fixed amount of money, so within a capped budget. And they introduced a number of measures at that time that were really focused on cost containment and ensuring that it gave the payer, Pharmac, as much power as they could really have to ensure that the prices that we were paying for these medicines was value for money, as we saw it, good value for money. And so there are a number of things that they did with that. They fixed the amount of money that Pharmac had to spend, and so once they reached that cap, that was as far as they could go. They also introduced a number of measures, sort of market measures, like granting single suppliers sort of monopoly over a particular disease area or supply of a particular product, which enabled to play off different suppliers against each other and to sort of drive prices down through competition in that way. They also would regularly tender for supply of particular areas. So basically using market competition, I guess, really to ensure that prices were as low as possible. And that, to be fair, I mean, it's been very, very effective. Like we New Zealand probably, for the health outcomes that we deliver from the amount of spending on or kind of funding envelope that Pharmac operate in, they're doing remarkably well. I guess the challenge over time is that the world as it was in the kind of the 90s and probably the early 2000s in terms of, sort of medical technology, as you alluded to, was, population-wide treatments, things for the cardiovascular disease and diabetes that were small molecule medicines with a low cost of development, low cost of manufacture. Sorry, the cost of development is still very high, but low cost of manufacture, and really the idea being that there was ability to kind of control the costs in that kind of space. If you're delivering a high volume, low cost medicine, that's still very attractive to suppliers, and so that the model works. I think what we've seen a shift from that period in the 90s to the kind of the late 2000s, where you saw the rise of targeted therapy, of sort of personalized healthcare as a concept. The early molecular targets in like leukemia and blood cancer and things really kind of changed the game a little bit, and it changed the game in the sense of the types of outcomes that we could see in cancer. We went from very particularly in cancer, sort of systemic chemotherapy as the kind of the gold standard, to targeted therapy, and all of a sudden, like the survival outcomes were just astronomical. The improvement was huge, but at the same time, the more targeted the therapies, the narrower the patient population who could benefit from those, and so the economics of the process changed a little bit in that way as well.
Yeah.
We were kind of just talking about it before, but essentially the cost of the overall development cost to a supplier hasn't really changed over time. If anything, it's probably grown. But as treatments become more targeted and populations become more narrow, the ability to return that investment once the drug is sort of approved and out in the wild has become harder. So to meet that kind of those costs and that development need, the prices have had to rise, and so that's what I kind of mean by the economics has really changed. Now you've gone from a low cost, high volume kind of world into a low volume, very high cost world that is delivering better outcomes, but for smaller slices of the population, and that's just kind of changed the game.
Yeah. So I suppose what I'm getting from that is that like Pharmac was awesome in the 90s because of the economic model that was there for medicines at that time. That's really slowly shifted, and now we've gone from like I don't know if a triangle to an inverted triangle is like the right approach, but one drug can be applied to many people versus one drug can be applied to only a handful of people. And sponsors need to be able to recoup some of their development and manufacturing costs. Otherwise, why would they do it? So it has to be more expensive. The problem therein is that the evaluation model for Pharmac hasn't really changed over time you mentioned it's kind of like geared around cost minimization. And if everything's very expensive, it might be too expensive for Pharmac's palate. Yeah,
look, I mean, I guess that's been a kind of an ongoing challenge, I suppose. They remain very focused on cost containment, and that kind of that budget piece is still a very important aspect of what they do, and they are doing it. They still do a very good job at that. I think the challenge that has been kind of recognized over time is that with the introduction of these sort of higher cost therapies, it's been harder and harder to get funding for a lot of those medicines, right? Like we just don't, I guess we don't have the Pharmac's kind of budget over time hasn't kind of grown commensurately with its responsibilities that it's taken on. And so its ability to pay, its sort of purchasing power has kind of declined a little bit over time. And so that's meant that fewer of those kind of high-cost sort of targeted therapies have been able to get to market in New Zealand to be funded. And really, the way that's been a bit of a slow kind of snowball, I suppose, over time, really, because Pharmac really we talked about it, they have a fixed budget, and the ways that they get money really is either through new money from government, sort of granting them a larger budget, or through generating savings out of their existing portfolio. And they can do that by tendering for the existing portfolio of medicines that they have, the generics, and that's been successful at sort of continuously driving, a few sort of tens of millions of dollars of savings every year. The other way is to wait for innovative medicines to lose their patent, to lose their exclusivity period. And at that point, other suppliers can start to manufacture those medicines.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you've got competition. And so that really pushes prices down because all of a sudden multiple players can deliver the medicines at a very much a lower cost. They don't have to worry about all of recouping any development. They're just coming in and they're supplying, right? And so
it's like your generics.
Generics is exactly. That's exactly what it is. And so that is the kind of like the third big way in which pharma can free up money within their existing budget. And what's happened is over time that the kind of the cupboard has kind of become a bit bare in terms of those innovative medicines because we've had a more difficult time introducing new medicines into the New Zealand market. We've sort of relatively speaking compared to OECD peers, we've probably funded maybe less than half of what we might have seen new kind of entities out of Australia, and maybe less again if you looked at the UK or Canada. So because we've sort of underinvested a little bit in that kind of innovative medicine space, we're not seeing that kind of those sort of patent cliffs that kind of occur that then create more space for the next round of innovation. And so it's been it's kind of a bit of a vicious cycle, I suppose, in some ways of underinvestment leading to less money available to invest in the next into the next thing. Yeah.
And I suppose if you're part of the argument with these market access applications, you're comparing it to standard of care, and if we're behind the eight ball in standard of care wise, then each generation becomes more difficult to present that argument because we don't have that previous generation of standard of care.
Absolutely, and that works in sort of two key ways. Really, it makes the comparison a lot more difficult. There's a lot more uncertainty because you don't have those direct studies. You don't know exactly the magnitude of benefit that your new intervention can have over a standard of care that might be, 2 or 3 iterations behind what your clinical study has adopted, right? And so that's a challenge, and agencies, HTA agencies are sort of very much risk averse to uncertainty. They sort of see uncertainty as a sort of a difficult concept, and they would use uncertainty as a way of sort of justifying for a lower price for the medicine, or perhaps trying to control sharing some of that risk in terms of in financial ways like caps to total expenditure or things like that. And so that's a real issue, and that makes the evaluation piece more difficult. And
so you play that out over like successive generations, and it just becomes more and more complex, or could you say at a certain point it might be impossible to compare unless you do like a bridging study? Which that's an added cost in itself. That's added time in itself, and all the while you have potentially scores of patients that are missing out on the modern available medicines that cousins over in Australia or the UK or the US would have access to.
Absolutely.
Promptly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just the economics of it is also changes quite a lot. If you've got a very cheap standard of care, it makes the level of benefit, that even though it's sort of a little bit uncertain, the level of benefit over an older standard of care might be higher, but the jump in cost is often very high as well. And so it's a more difficult comparison to make just from a sort of a health economic perspective, because often the magnitude of benefit change is not quite at the level of the kind of the cost impact sometimes that medicine will deliver. So it makes it a lot. The system sort of making small steps is a lot makes it a lot easier for new innovation to arrive than if you're trying to make sort of consistent quantum leaps in access.
What I find really interesting about that is that if you applying a quantum leap in technology at the healthcare level, that in itself is very difficult as well. I mean, you can't expect to go from, Lipitor to like a cell and gene therapy for whatever, overnight. That's going to be, quite a challenge. So there's other further reaching complications as well with having this like delayed approach, quantum leap reliance on having access to new medicines. Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy. What would be the answer then? I mean, is it where the strategy needs to change from a cost minimization approach or a cost control approach to more what are the actual outcomes that patients are receiving and what is the utility or cost benefit analysis that kind of applies everything, throws like everything but the kitchen sink into the calculation in terms of benefits or outcomes, right? I mean, there needs to be a change, surely.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, I think, and it comes back a little bit to probably asking ourselves, like, what do we want out of our health system, and particularly our sort of drug purchasing agencies or our health technology purchasing agencies? What's important to us? Because I think we talked about it when Pharma was set up. The focus was to make sure that we were getting good opportunity for good investment. We were paying a sort of a commensurate amount for the purchasing power of our country, and they've done a good job at that. And I want to recognise as well that the HTA system that we have in New Zealand is very robust. It's a very good system. There are some issues with, I think, some of the aspects of how we operate it in terms of its transparency and its ability to probably evaluate objectively. I think the challenge of the Pharmac holding both the kind of the evaluator and budget holding kind of caps makes for some difficulties sometimes. But I think overall, it's a good system for evaluating medicines. I think where we run into often problems is that the model as a fixed budget basically means that Pharmac have to rank their investments from best value to less good value, and they just work their way down the list until they run out of money. And that's not, to me, that's not a particularly efficient way of allocating funds to a health investment, because it might be that there are other medicines on that list of investments that are also very good value for money relative to other potential investments in health. And because Pharmac only have a certain amount of money to spend, they can't get to those investments because they've run out of funds before they get there. And so I think one of the big changes that we sort of see is that there's an allocative inefficiency happening with the use of siloed budgets within our health system. And so I guess there's a couple of ways that you could think about how you address that issue, and one of them would be to try and bring the evaluation process of our medicines and health technologies into line with other evaluation processes we see with other parts of government, in order to make sure that we have kind of a even comparison on what is a good investment. And then by doing that, you can make better allocative decisions. You can sort of trade off, well, this medicine has so many kind of quality adjusted life years gained per dollar spent. This intervention over here in infrastructure, say like this road or this safety measure on this particular stretch of highway, will also deliver this many life years per dollar spent. And so you're able to kind of say, well, actually, I think that the money should be better spent over here, or even just within health. This investment into this particular infrastructure or this clinic that we need to set up in this particular city has a magnitude of benefit, a value. Because it is a little bit of a zero-sum game. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but at the moment in the current environment, money spent somewhere is probably money taken from somewhere else. And so the idea being that you just need to be better at being able to make investment trade-offs across the whole health portfolio. And I think the way that we kind of operate things at the moment is not the most efficient way of doing things. There are ways in which I think that Pharmac's methodology could be kind of brought into line with those other parts of government, and that's probably considering the broader value or the broader benefits that medicines have on society more generally. I think we do take a very narrow view of what those benefits are. We look to the health benefits to the patient, and we sort of look at the costs to the health system as a kind of a narrow view. But for a lot of conditions, for medicines that are very effective, or even just moderately effective, I suppose, there are benefits beyond just that to the health of the patient. If they're able to return to work earlier, there are productivity gains for society. If they're able to just take care of themselves, I suppose, a bit better, then that has benefits for their immediate whānau or family around them, often the carers. And so there are benefits beyond the patient that we don't count in our evaluation that have real kind of societal benefit. And in other parts of cost-benefit analysis done in other parts of government, those societal costs and benefits are taken into account. And so we're kind of disadvantaging health investment a little bit by not counting those things, because often that is benefit we're leaving on the table. We're leaving it off to the side.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I think that would probably make health investment look more attractive relative to other areas, and perhaps would sort of justify greater investment in that space.
Yeah. I mean, we do that in our own personal lives, right? We go like, how much value am I getting out of this? I think Abbas and I talked about a coffee, which I thought was like the most rudimentary comparison. But you do it in your personal life, so why wouldn't you do it at the most fundamentally important health level, which is throw in everything but the kitchen sink at the evaluation to make sure you're making that right decision?
Yeah, well, at least, I mean, you want to understand what the major drivers are and what the major benefits are. And I think, there's doing this within a kind of a cost-benefit analysis is one of the tools that you should use. I think it's worth pointing out that cost utility, cost-benefit analysis, they're decision-making tools, right? They're not providing you the answer. They're providing you information that still requires someone to make a difficult decision. There's still going to be trade-offs. And so what we aim to do is to provide the most holistic and most kind of accurate picture of what those benefits are, and then you can decide where you ultimately put your money. And so one of the focuses, I guess one of the common kind of, worries about adopting a societal perspective, particularly adopting productivity as a measure within analysis, is that it biases towards productive areas of society. So that might be working age people, or or biases against people like children or elderly or people who are unable to work. And so what you try to do is you make sure that those costs are counted and that you have a clearer idea of what that looks like. But then CBA or that kind of analysis is not the only piece of information that you would use to make that decision ultimately. You would look to, because it may be that we hold equity of outcomes just as important as quantity or overall kind of total outcomes that are delivered, right? So we want to make sure that not only are we getting good value for money, but those outcomes are being delivered or distributed within a group or a population of people that we want to see benefit the most. And so that kind of efficiency versus equity argument is an important one, and cost-benefit analysis, particularly of any type, really doesn't directly answer that question. And so you overlay these other kind of value judgments or preferences on top of all of that, and that kind of gives you a kind of a framework to try and make better decisions.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because we kind of think of everything being like sterile numbers, calculations, but as you literally just said, but you're overlaying your own values, your own desires for your country or your society over that, and that might change it's a different lens. It's like the lens through which you're looking at those numbers. The numbers don't tell all the story, but they tell a lot of the story, and they could guide you to maybe rank your decision making. But then you apply those additional values over the top.
Absolutely, and we have a framework. Pharma has a framework, the factors for consideration, that look at broader impacts than just the cost effectiveness. And I think what the difficulty is with that kind of framework is that it's not always clear how those different aspects are applied to different applications. And so I guess you want to kind of see a sort of a formalized framework or a sort of common framework that applies those things in a consistent manner. And then it just being kind of open and transparent about how we're making decisions, I think, is very important. It's kind of one of the core tenets of any kind of good public policy practice, right? That we should be able to understand how decisions are made and critique those decisions, and say whether they are meeting, like you say, the preferences of the public. Because ultimately, it's public money, it's taxpayer money. So that you want to see everybody has a bit of a kind of a stake in the game in a way. That you want to see that the money is spent in the most appropriate or consistent way with our values.
Yeah. So that kind of speaks to the strategy side of things, maybe like, how decision making can be done in a more modern framework that throws in all of those additional benefits and outcomes into the calculation. But I'm sure there is also like a budgetary need, budgetary increase need as well. I mean, these modern medicines are not cheap. And I think I saw a figure that we're lowest in the OECD on medicine spend, which is quite remarkable. You alluded to that the value for money that we do get out of that low spend is remarkable. But I mean, you keep doing that over successive.
Well, I think it comes back to the question of like what do we want? What do we as a society? What do we want our health system to be able to deliver? And do we want better access to innovative medicines? And does that reasonably justify a greater level of investment in this area? And I think that the process is set up to try and assess the level of the value of investment in this area. And I think by making some of these other process changes, you get a better sense of how medicines compare to other investments, and that's important. I think it's probably reasonable to ask if we're spending enough in this space in order to deliver the kind of expectations of a sort of advanced kind of economy's health system, right? And I think you're right. We on a kind of a per capita basis or as a percentage of our health spend, our spend on medicines is very low compared to our kind of OECD peers. I think we spend, 2 or 3 cents, probably 3 or 4 cents on the dollar of our health spend on medicines, which is quite a low proportion, comparatively speaking. And we do get good health outcomes for that spend, but I guess the question is, is that the ambition or the kind of consistent with how we would like our kind of health system to value those kind of investments, or is that kind of consistent really? Yeah.
I mean, I would like to think that we'd move on from like a 90s style framework for decision making and evaluating things in the 2020s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's right, and I think that with recently Pharma, there was a review of their operations, and I think it went into a lot of detail on their processes and things like that, and a lot of good kind of feedback came out of that. That there should be a bit of a more focus on transparency, and they better kind of more of a focus on sort of the obligations around tiriti and the equity side of things. I think that those are very important. What was left out of that review, and it was probably one of the kind of key things, is Pharmac's budget sufficient to deliver the outcomes that they're being asked to deliver, which is kind of disappointing, right? Because I think that's kind of the core question is are they're doing the best with the hand that they're being dealt. But is that ambitious enough, or is that what we want, or would we want them to have a bit more money to invest and perhaps deliver some of these better health outcomes for New Zealanders? Because it does feel like, if you look around countries that we would kind of commonly compare ourselves to, Australia and the UK and Canada, that we are falling behind a little bit when it comes to medicines access. And you see there was a really great report from the Cancer Control Agency, from Te Ao, and they basically just highlighted a list of medicines in cancer, so not even all cancer, but just like sort of solid tumours, where between what was funded and available in Australia and what was not in New Zealand, and these treatments were sort of international standard of care in a dozen different cancer types, and that just weren't available to New Zealanders here, and I guess that just feels like that's a bit of a unfortunate circumstance, right? Like we don't. It shouldn't have to be that way. I think if you were, a patient who had just been diagnosed with one of these cancers, you'd look at that and you'd sort of wonder why it was that Australia or Canada or the UK had found the reason to fund, and that New Zealand had decided not to. And so, and partly that, there are economic realities to that. We are a smaller country. We don't have the money that a larger nation does to invest in these sorts of things. But at the same time, I guess it's not always about just the total cost of therapy. It's about what, coming back to that same sort of thing, what is a good investment? Are these medicines good value for money? And if they are, then I think we'd like to see more of them made available to patients in New Zealand, people in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Hendo, I think your microphone's on. I can hear the clicking. Oh, true. Anyway, we can cut that out. All good. So maybe to drive that point home, like if you've got a drug that prevents like hospitalization countless times throughout it, say it provides a functional cure. I think like there's a spina bifida Speranza. Is that spina bifida? Maybe it's another one.
Oh yeah, spinal muscular atrophy.
There we go. Yeah. Incredibly expensive medicine. Like I think it's like $1 million a pop or something. But that would be more or less a functional cure for a patient that does receive it. That would keep them out of hospital. That would keep them in school. That would enable them to be employed, paying taxes. So when you have like this big lens of all the different benefits, it kind of makes that, say it's $1 million, a bit more palatable because you're kind of amortizing the cost over that time span and adding in all the additional benefits that you wouldn't otherwise had if you just looked at $1 million on its own. So that's kind of what you're alluding to, plus values, plus like societal implications. And then other obligations that we have, equity, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And I think that's what the process of the economic evaluation kind of steps through, right? It's about not just the costs of the intervention and the drug acquisition costs, I suppose, but all of those downstream costs and benefits that you are going to accrue. And there's a kind of a key kind of affordability question around that as well, that we often encounter when you talk about cell and gene therapy, where it perhaps might just be a one-off very high cost at the very beginning, but then if it does play out that way and you're kind of cured of whatever that affliction or disease is, then you've got a lifetime of benefit then that you sort of like discount back to present day, and that's how you kind of justify or argue for these kind of higher sticker prices. But that you also have to balance that with, is that affordable? Like, can we pay millions and millions of dollars today for all of this benefit downstream? And so there needs to be a balance. You need to kind of overlay both of those pieces together. But I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the difficulties, coming back again to the way that we structure our health spend and the kind of the siloed nature of budgets, is that can get in the way of properly recognizing savings across different parts of our health system, right? And so if Pharmac is responsible for managing pharmaceutical spending and budget, but a medicine may not deliver kind of much in the way of extra health outcomes to patients, but might save a lot of capacity, say within a other part of the health system. Say it's a different delivery method. You go from an infusion to a pill, and so all of a sudden patients don't need to go to a infusion clinic and sit in a chair for 6 hours. They can take a tablet at home, and so there might not be any benefit directly to that patient, but there's a huge benefit to the system. But those costs aren't recognised by Pharmac themselves. That might accrue to Whatuora or to a different place in the health budget, right? And so there needs to be, and we try and do this as well as possible. You count those costs and you try and
but that's outside of their remit, so they're not recognised. Well,
yeah, it does, and even if they do find they do consider those costs and they try and account for that, the fixed nature of the budget means that all of those costs are shifted out of another part of the health system onto Pharmac's budget, which means that they have less money to invest in something else. And so it makes it hard to spread, I suppose, the benefits or the cost savings across a system where you've got very siloed buckets of money.
Yeah.
And so I guess one of the changes that you could kind of argue for, I suppose, is to try to free up that allocation efficiency, is to remove those silos and sort of have a central purchaser or payer, and keep Pharmac as the as the evaluator with the expertise and all of the system that the things that they do very, very well, keep them doing that, and that's fantastic. And then make recommendations to a central payer, for instance. And this is a lot of countries, this is how their HTA systems work. So Australia, the UK, and Canada, I think all operate systems where they have an independent evaluator who makes decisions and assesses whether the investment is a good investment or not, make recommendations to a Ministry of Health or Department of Health or someone else. And then that Ministry of Health has remit across the whole of the health sector. And so they can decide, well, yes, that is good value for money. We are going to invest money in that because it has savings to this other thing over here that I'm also responsible for. And so that to me is value. Our system makes that trade-off more difficult. And I think that's one of the kind of key kind of challenges. Yeah.
So it's almost as though the scope of what pharma are looking at is a little bit too narrow for today's purposes, when it's not just about a single medicine. It's about like all the other interactions that a potential patient might have with the healthcare system. Those costs are recognised currently outside of Pharmac's remit, so they're not built into the analyses. If we had the analysis at a higher level, incorporating all of those costs and benefits, again, looking at the values on top of that, it would be a lot more fair. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, I guess they are counted. We do count them, and so they're presented as part of the economic evaluation, and they are considered. I suppose it's just when it comes to actually investing in things, it just creates a barrier because it's money that they are going to have to allocate within their budget for a benefit of another part of it. Yeah, and so that just there are challenges to that, and I suppose it just means that where their budget is fixed and not growing, they can recognise that spend in their budget, but it would mean that something else is going to probably have to miss out. And so that the savings that are over here aren't then reallocated into Pharmac's budget in order for them to to really truly be recognised as cost neutral, and so they can then...
So it's like double counting the costs and undercounting the benefits because it's not part of their... Oh, man. Oh, it's tricky. Well, Matt, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Yeah, you're welcome.
If people want to find out a bit more about market access, or maybe get in touch if they're interested in, this wider story, but also the blending of economics, business, and science. When you have a chat, where can they go?
Oh, look, there's great societies in New Zealand. I think one of the fantastic things about a small country is that how accessible everybody is, and the small network of people that you can join societies like ASPOR or some of the health economic networks around, and that will give you a bit of a flavour for the industry in New Zealand. Reaching out to people like myself directly through like social media channels and things like that is another way to go. But yeah, a brilliant thing about New Zealand is how open and accessible generally people are, and willing to share their knowledge and their expertise. And so I think just start reaching it. Just reach out to people. Don't be afraid to cold email or kind of reach out and just ask questions. And more often than not, people are very, very open to that.
That's awesome. Yeah. There you go, folks. Open invite. Go hard. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Charles.